Good afternoon, dear friends, colleagues, and students. I feel overwhelmed by the fact that I've been invited to this rich conference by an ex-student of mine. Time do pass very quickly, and with the passing years, I see with satisfaction and pleasure how the torch of study and teaching is being transferred safely to the next generation, and I feel that I have achieved something. Thank you, Dr. Shai Srougo. Thank you, Dr. Gila Hadar. My presentation today is about the lives of Jewish workers in Salonika through the lens of various archival sources, mostly pertaining to the Jewish community of Salonika. This is a rather neglected subject. Themes such as the development of the Greek labor movement in Salonika and elsewhere, its organizational structure, its battles over decent working conditions and adequate wages, and its struggles for a proper place in the Greek political arena have been given a lot of attention in modern studies. Whereas, of course, a lot has still to be done, as we shall hear in our conference. One facet of the working people's lives has not attracted the attention of scholars, and that is the everyday life and living conditions of the worker, male and female. And I will strive, as I said in this presentation, to unfold some of the aspects pertaining to their lives in the city. And I shall be speaking only on the interwar periods. That is from 1912 to 1941. Everyday life is a complex and variegated subject, and it goes without saying that I shall not be able to touch all its aspects, and we shall have to make do with just a few of them. As I said, my sources are primarily archival sources, those of the Jewish community archives preserved in Moscow, complemented by the part of the archives preserved in the Central Archives for the History of the Jewish People in Jerusalem, as well as the Ladino and Greek press of the period. The first question that we have to ask ourselves is, what do we actually know about the lives of the Jewish working people of Salonika? Now, the majority of the Jewish population were either hired daily workers or porters, haulage workers, and small independent artisans who were their own masters. In 1936, the sources mentioned above point to the number of some 7,400 breadwinners of this sort, who represent approximately 40,000 community members. The overall number of Salonican Jewry at that year was more or less 50,000 people. Just a small number out of the other 10,000 community members consisted of the families of the economic elite of big merchants, brokers, industrialists, bankers, insurance agents, and their service providers, such as shipping agents, lawyers, accountants, and clerks. Beside those, the majority of the rest were the families of the unemployed. That is to say that the 10,000 people outside the 40,000 that I was talking about, the greater part of them were unemployed. And another question that comes to mind is, under what housing conditions did the Jewish workers, employed or unemployed, live during the interwar period? A cautious estimate would suggest that the majority of the working class had lived in the suburban area created at the periphery of the city after the 1890 fire, and especially after the 1970 fire. A smaller part lived among the ruins of the 1970 burnt zone until they were ousted out when rebuilding started. The meaning of this estimate is that the majority of the Jewish community lived under the conditions that shall be described herewith. I shall bring just a few examples of the living condition in these popular neighborhoods, Los Faubourgs Populares, as they were called by the Judeo-Spanish-speaking Jews of Salonika. Neighborhood number 6 was called after the General Hospital of the Armel d'Orient, which was called by the same name. Situated between Ayu Dimitriou and Cassandrou, it was built on municipal ground bought from the French government and rented by the Jewish community. In this neighborhood were built 45 brick buildings. Each of them contained 2 apartments of 4 rooms and the kitchen, all in all 360 rooms, in which were housed 350 families whose dwellings were burned in the Great Fire. The community took it upon itself to install a sewage system, and the buildings were connected to the electricity network. The occupants of the neighborhood were so poor that in 1935 they were actually exempted from paying the rent to the municipality. I would like to draw your attention to the equation 360 rooms equal 350 families. I will return to this equation later. Another neighborhood is the neighborhood of Regie Vardar. It was planned by the state as an ideal garden city for 1,200 families to be housed in 200 brick houses. At the end were built only 700 wooden rooms for 800 families. The building was stopped and never resumed. The intended inhabitants settled in the half-built houses anyway. In 1921, there were in the place 75 blocks and all in all 775 rooms, which accommodated 5,000 people. They were the poorest of Salonika's Jews. Again, please bear in mind the equation 5,000 people divided by 775, which means 6.5 people per room. The water closet was in the courtyard, and several families served several families each. Each family created a makeshift kitchen adjacent to its room. Air Paraskevi was built by the state in the northwest part of the city and comprised of 50 houses intended for 200 families, which means 4 people per room. The residents of the houses were their owners. At the beginning, in 1921, there were houses only, these were houses only in name. They lacked roofs, they lacked inner partitions. In time, the inhabitants ameliorated their dwellings, added roofs, partitions, kitchens, and water closets. In time were added more dwellings which leaned on the existing ones. The neighborhood was not connected to the electricity. I shall end with the neighborhood called in Judeo-Spanish Las Casiquitas de 151, meaning the little houses of 151. The name was derived from another hospital, hospital number 151, which was founded during the First World War by the Italian government and given after the Great Fire for a symbolic sum to the Jewish community. Actually, it was a gift of the King of Italy. The 100 blocks of the hospital were converted by the community into 900 rooms intended for 900 families. Approximately 4,500 human beings were living in this neighborhood. And this was a lax neighborhood in comparison to Regi, for example. I shall not elaborate on the other neighborhoods. These will suffice to draw the picture of the workers' lives. The basic fact that emerges from the plain numbers brought here is that each family had one room. Such rooms were a home to 3 generations sometimes: grandparents, their married children, and their grandchildren. It is redundant to elaborate on the influence of such a situation on age at marriage or family life in general. The high density in these neighborhoods and the inadequate educational system drove many children to the streets where they were looking for any possible way to earn a drachma. In Aya Paraskevi, humans and animals shared many times the same abode. The high density was also a reason for the prevalence of infectious maladies in these neighborhoods, and especially in Regi Vardar. The neighborhood got its name from the Regi tobacco industrial plant nearby, the working place of many of the Jews living in this neighborhood. The Regi was a swampy place infested with smallpox, malaria, and especially tuberculosis. The worst season of the year, as far as the poor dwellers of these neighborhoods were concerned, had been the winter. Lack of resources to buy warm clothes, blankets, and call for warming was a major predicament, which could hardly be solved by charity organized by associations of women who belonged to well-off families. The poor students at the community schools of the popular neighborhoods enjoyed 1 suit of clothes per year, thanks to the charity of the Halbasha clothing enterprise, conducted again by women of the moneyed classes, who distributed them on the eve of Passover. This privilege ended for most children when they left school, that is between the age of 10 to 13. Children who attended the state schools did not enjoy this charity, nor did the thousands of children who did not attend school at all. Those were the ones who were described in the Jewish neighborhoods as roaming around the streets barefooted, dressed in rags. As already was mentioned, the density of population in the popular neighborhoods and the proximity of the Regi neighborhood to the Vardar swamps were a major cause for endemic diseases. Now, what were the chances of a worker or of a worker's family who fell sick? The Jewish community had a long-standing tradition of a public healthcare system called Bikur Cholim, calling on the sick, which provided universal health services. Needless to say that well-off people who could pay for private healthcare received better treatment, but their chances of recovery were also ameliorated by better housing and better nutrition. Having said all that, it should be emphasized that the tradition of public health services had continued through the centuries without interruption. In 1898, following the building of Baron Hirsch neighborhood, another working-class dwelling place, a communal clinic was founded there upon the initiative of the Baroness and Baron de Hirsch. Another clinic was founded following their initiative in the Vardar neighborhood. In 1922 was founded a communal dispensary in Atinon Street near 151 neighborhood, sponsored by Chaim Pinchas. In 1928 was founded yet another clinic in Regi Vardar, following the initiative of Yitzhak Hasid. In 1929, the community initiated and carried out the building of Bikur Cholim infirmary of 14 rooms on the grounds of the burnt zone where the Plaza Judea used to be. Adjacent to the clinics were also pharmacies. It was estimated that all these services had catered to the needs of some 7,000 people each year, and 6,000 more received medical care in their homes. The jewel in the crown was the Clara de Hirsch Hospital, founded upon the initiative of the Buen Doctor, as he was nicknamed, Moise Mizrahi. He persuaded the Baroness to contribute a great part of the money needed for its foundation, and worked hard to persuade the community leaders to come up with a part of the rest. A good share was raised from hard-working families who gave a small sum each for the cause that was supposed to give health care to all community members, rich and poor alike. The hospital was opened in 1908, and in its heyday, it had 99 beds, 49 of which were allocated to non-paying patients. However, from the end of the 1920s, complaints of patients from the popular neighborhoods on the attitude of the hospital's administration and medical staff towards them became prevalent. It was a common knowledge that the poor patient had to raise hell in order to be hospitalized. Patients were discharged before they got well enough in order to make room for others, and at the same time, people who were not sick at all enjoyed the hospital services because of their connections in the right places. The poor had ways to deal with their predicament. The poorest had to rely on the community. They approached the Bikur Cholim, and if proven poor, as they said, they were given a right to a certain number of Bikur Cholim's doctor consultation. Having used all of their rights, they could still approach the neighborhood's committee and ask for assistance. This was more or less the last resort. Often people entitled to Bikur Cholim rights preferred to hand over their value to a mutual assistance society as part of their membership fee in order to increase the range of their ability to obtain medical help. These societies acted as health insurance agencies and for a small membership fee, reduced the worry people of limited means had, lest they will not be able to afford the medical fees for themselves or someone from their family if they fall sick. The Mutual Assistance Society were affiliated usually with the neighborhood and with a certain political party or at least a political idea. The largest of these was the Union Mutuala, which operated in most of the popular neighborhoods and was under the influence of the Communist Party. In 1936, according to their own declaration, they had 1,500 members. It boasted with the services of 11 pharmacies, 12 doctors, and an assortment of specialized doctors. Members of the Union Mutuala could approach the Hirsch Hospital, the Italian hospital, or the clinic of Dr. Balianos, probably an Armenian. The Union Mutuala had also agreements with a shop that sold medical equipment, 3 nurses who frequented the house of the sick to give injections, and several spas. Complaints against the Hirsch Hospital's treatment of members of the Union Mutuala piled up from February 1935. The hospital's attitude may have stemmed from its deteriorating financial situation, but the reason may have also been political. The Greek government persecuted the communists. The party was outlawed, and the Union Mutuala was identified with it. Although not all its members were also party members, it was identified with the Communist Party. In any case, the many complaints led the Union Mutuala to appoint an action committee that would get the hospital's executive committee to change its policy. The action committee didn't have many weapons to brandish. They addressed the hospital's board of directors and pointed out illegal actions and mismanagement on its part. When this did not help, the action committee gave the executive committee of the community this time a week to study its claims before publishing what it knew in all the Jewish press, an act that would cause the hospital a great damage, they said. When the ultimatum didn't work, the Union Mutuala continued to press, but at the same time turned to the municipal clinics, which charged lesser fees than the Hirsch Hospital. There were also other mutual assistance healthcare associations, such as Ahavat Zion and Bnei Avraham. These were affiliated to Zionist parties. The Union Mutuala Action Committee claimed that the threshold conditions for Bnei Avraham and the Ahavat Zion members were better than their own, and thus they were more easily admitted to the hospital than members of the Union Mutuala. One of the questions the Action Committee asked was, how is it possible that the hospital board of directors, the one who constantly cries out that the hospital is facing a financial crisis, allows itself to sniff at the money of the poor patients and let it go to the municipal clinics? The answer seems to lie in the fact that the money paid by the mutual aid associations was never an indemnity that covered all the hospital's expenses for their members. The Union Mutuala Action Committee must have known this, but it didn't lead them to give up the right of the poor to medical care. The hospital was, in the opinion of the poor, not only for the rich. The Union Mutuala insured the worker and his family, but not independent female workers. These last ones formed a separate section in the association which competed, with that of the male members on communal and municipal allocations. Both sections were in constant financial deficit. It was also involved in fierce struggles on the political character of its leadership. The association disappeared in 1936, probably due to its communist affinities. An interesting mutual aid association was the Deborah Association in the neighborhood 151. The association was founded in November 1920 by women from this neighborhood in order to help its members and their families, as well as other needy families in the neighborhood, to obtain medical care and medications during illness. In other words, it was a women's association for women. The association's sources of funding came in part from membership fees of 6 drachmas per month, donations by the members, and donations collected from other sources. Apart from the medical care given to the members of the society during illness and the cooked food distributed among the sick who were helpless each winter, the society distributed a certain amount of coal for heating among the neediest and the widows, whether they were members of the society or not. This association of women was basically run by women for themselves. Their charitable work was a side mission. All was done without advertising, without the noise and commotion that characterized the Union Mutuala, and it was never in deficit. It ceased to exist in 1941 upon the German occupation. A bleak phenomenon of the workers' life was the prevalence of tuberculosis among them. This was not something typical to Jewish workers only. The disease was pervasive all over urban Greece. In 1936, the number of tuberculosis disease all over Greece was between 200,000 to 300,000 patients. There were large numbers of tuberculosis patients in the popular neighborhoods. In 1936, 50% of the residents of Shai Vardar were diagnosed with tuberculosis. That's at least 750 to 800 persons. The prevalence of tuberculosis in this neighborhood had 2 reasons. One, it was a professional disease among the tobacco workers, most of whom lived and worked in this neighborhood. The workers breathed tobacco dust for several months a year, a dust that accumulated in their lungs. The second reason was mentioned already, the overcrowding in the homes of the workers' families, where sometimes 3 generations lived in one room. Ignoring the disease that affected one person meant it spread among his family members, and eventually his fellow workers and their families, and the whole neighborhood. Thus, the problem could not be ignored. The Greek government was aware of the seriousness of the problem and did everything to improve the situation. But it was too short of salvation, and so were the efforts of the Salonika Jewish community. In 1919, in order to deal with the disease, the Greek government purchased a military hospital established by the British in the village of Asvestochori, with the aim of turning it into a sanatorium for tuberculosis patients. In the village were 25 military barracks with 100 beds, a number that could, when necessary, reach between 2 and 250 beds by adding tents to the barracks. There were common toilets and showers, a water pump, and a kitchen. The buildings were makeshift wooden structures and the windows lacked shutters. The first patients were admitted only in 1921, and out of 42 hospitalized, about 10 were from Salonika. I don't know if they were Jews or not. By early 1927, it was clear that the number of tuberculosis patients among the tobacco workers was growing rapidly. The reason for this was the enormous growth in the tobacco industry between 1925 and 1926. It was decided that a special pavilion for tobacco workers should be built on the sanatorium grounds. The building was planned to contain 40 beds, but even before its completion, it became clear that the number of patients requiring hospitalization was 6 times the number of beds planned. Many tobacco workers suffering from tuberculosis remained in the city without any treatment. In 1926, the Salonika City Council decided to build its own dedicated pavilions for tuberculosis patients. Work continued until 1928, and hospitalized patients in municipal pavilions paid 60 drachmas for each day of hospitalization, an enormous sum compared to their earnings. That same year, a tobacco workers' pavilion financed by the Tobacco Insurance Fund, called in short on its Greek name, TAC. Such a pavilion was completed. The pavilion contained 30 beds, and each patient paid 45 drachmas a day for his hospitalization. Only patients recognized as complete paupers were admitted free of charge. In addition to this, construction began in 1927 of a pavilion funded by the Anti-Tuberculosis League. The League was unable to raise the necessary money, and the TAC entered as a partner in the venture. Part of it was financed by organizing banquets and folk festivals, as well as by collecting a hospital fee of 45 drachmas per day from those admitted to the 30 beds in the pavilion, from them or from the relatives who accompanied them. It was not until the end of 1929 that this pavilion of Anti-Tuberculosis League was opened, with 48 beds in total, of which, as I already stated, 30 were intended for tobacco workers. 10 beds in this pavilion were designated for the Jews of Salonika. 6 beds were provided immediately, and another 4 were promised when space became available. The allocation of these 10 beds was made in exchange for a donation of 20,000 drachmas from the Meir Gineo Jewish Anti-Tuberculosis League. Of course, all these projects did not meet the needs of patients, neither non-Jews nor Jews. The inauguration of the pavilion of the Anti-Tuberculosis League in the TAC was the first time that the tuberculosis-stricken Jewish workers of Salonika were mentioned as eligible for hospitalization in the Asvestochori Sanatorium. This may have had something to do with the community's indifference to the issue up to that time. In the sources examined by me, there is no evidence of community activity on the subject of tuberculosis among the Jews of the city until 1929. That same year, a group of private individuals founded the Jewish Anti-Tuberculosis League named after Meir Gineo. The League was unable to implement its main goal, that was building a community sanatorium for the Jewish tuberculosis patients. At the same time, the fact that the core protagonists of the League were identified as Zionists was enough to discredit it by the main ideologies of the popular neighborhoods, since it meant that they, the leaders of the people who suffered most from the disease, had done nothing for them. And there was also the worry that the city authorities will regard the Jewish patients as a problem of their own community only. Only a few Jewish patients were admitted to the sanatorium in Ezvastochori or received any medical treatment. Those who won a place in the sanatorium faced another obstacle. One had to get there, and it had cost money. Most of the patients were extremely poor and turned to the community for the fare. However, all such requests were refused. All those who were not admitted to the sanatorium or who did not have the travel fare to the village continued their lives within the community and were the focus of infection for their family members and people with whom they worked or had other contact. The knowledge that a woman or a man had tuberculosis was usually kept secret in the family. And as soon as this information left the territory of the family, the whole family was stigmatized as unclean. Tuberculosis patients sometimes prefer to commit suicide so as not to become a burden on their families or infect them. For example, 35-year-old Buena Grotas ended her life by drinking an immense quantity of alcohol after learning she had tuberculosis. A pair of 18-year-old tobacco workers who were in love, who learned that the young woman had tuberculosis, committed suicide together. Tobacco workers were the largest group among the Jewish tuberculosis patients in the city. Thus, the motivation to help them was torn between two opposing poles. The one pole was their identification with the Communist Party, which was regarded as a satanic enemy by the community as an organization, as well as all the other Jewish political parties, not to mention by the Greek government. Due to all this, the fate of the patients did not arouse empathy. However, there was also an opposing pole which gathered around two motives. One, on the part of the community, the possibility of using aid to tuberculosis patients to attract them towards the normative Jewish parties. And on the other part of the Greek state to use this aid to diffuse the communist unrest among the tobacco workers. The second motive was the fear of the spread of the disease outside the popular neighborhoods. We have no statistical data as to the access of these working people to medical assistance, nor on the rate of recovery from the disease if they did receive such assistance. But if it is recalled that in 1934, a tobacco worker who wished to exercise his right to medical treatment had to prove that he or she had worked 45 days in the previous year, that is, worked in the tobacco. And during that year, the TAC rejected 5,000 requests for medical treatment only from males, and they constituted just a small portion of the tobacco workforce. A bleak picture indeed is portrayed. Let me finish my talk with a less depressing note. How did these workers spend their free time? Free time depended on several parameters: age, gender, personal status, and profession. For young, unattached workers of both sexes, a much coveted way of entertainment was the dancing hall. There, even a hard daily worker, male or female, who managed to save a few drachmas, which were invested in the proper attire, would do his or her best to attract the attention of the opposite sex, and if lucky, even to find a partner for life. There they had found cave y passion, pleasure and passion. The dancing hall constituted a liminal zone at which the class differences could be circumvented. A choice of a partner was no longer supervised by one's family. Now, the idea that young girls could spend their meager salaries in order to get a partner outside the traditional family supervision was a cause for concern to the middle and even the upper middle class, since the conduct of the factory workers, especially the female tobacco workers, was considered a very bad example for the good girls who aspired to imitate the freedom of the former. The criticism of these girls was expressed in the political satirical press of the early 1920s, written by Zionist intellectuals. The radical faction of the Zionist movement, which aspired to recruit the working classes and envisioned a modest and pious feminine ideal that honors the nation. The unrestrained female tobacco worker, or the well-born young girl who followed her despicable ways, did not fit this ideal. There were even calls to fine girls who use cosmetics or wear expensive clothes. These voices were answered by, I quote, a group of free-thinking young women, end of quote, who asked how the critics of the working girls' fashion intended to enforce their idea. Using, I quote again, using gendarmes to lift a girl's skirt in order to check the quality of her lingerie or to sniff the quality of her perfume, end of quote. Whereas the dancing hall required a considerable financial effort on the part of those aspiring to enter its gates, there were other possibilities as well. Most of these possibilities were offered by two opposing political parties: the communists under their Jewish section, the Bloc Popular, and the radical Zionists, that is, Hamizrahi. The Union Mutuala mentioned above was not only an association providing medical care, it was also an entertainment agent. Each Saturday, a popular celebration organized by the Union Mutuala was held at the Beschinar Gardens. The goal was to raise money for the Union's activity. The entrance fee was 5 drachmas, for which the patrons could enjoy dancing, a popular market, raffles, a rare animal circus, an electric message to calm the nerves, and such things. To encourage the residents of the popular neighborhoods to come to these festivities, which required a tram ride, the tram continued its operation all night, and so that even the residents of Shai Vardar and Baron Hirsch could reach the gardens and return home when they were satisfied with the revelry. It is unclear what was the basis of the arrangement between the tram management and the Union Mutuala. This popular entertainment financed part of the activities of the Union Mutuala, but at the same time, it gave its residents of the popular neighborhoods an opportunity to unite ranks and to create a spirit of unitary pride, the same unity of ranks that the Communist Party, which was heavily involved in the activities of the Union, aspired to achieve. A more sophisticated and expensive entertainment agent was the dramatic circle of the Communist Party members, Il Gruppo Drammatico. The Jewish-Spanish dramatic circle operated both in the popular neighborhoods where the Jewish workers lived, as well as in the city center, and staged plays of a political nature that conveyed the messages of the party. Whoever bought a ticket for the Gruppo Drammatico performances, whether in the popular neighborhoods or in the group's residence on Singro Street, it was not necessarily a communist. If he or she were residents of Regi and Vardar, for example, and wanted an evening of fun and laughter, not an expensive one, and without having to pay the tram ticket to go downtown, attending the dramatic circle in the neighborhood was a kind of solution. When the dramatic circle sold them tickets for its performance, it provided them with what they wanted, and by the way, sold them the message that the party wanted to deliver. In 1930, the group prepared a series of plays called Bilagi, meaning a man of quarrel and divisiveness. This series of plays were an original Salonican creation in Judeo-Spanish. It was a political satire that made a mockery of what the party saw as the corrupt election campaign held in the community by the Zionists, and especially by the parliament member Menteshi Ben Shagji, who was actually the protagonist of the satire. The play Bilagi was written by a party member, the Communist Party, Alberto Moljo. All the roles in the play were casted by party members. Other plays from the world repertoire translated into Judeo-Spanish, all with a clear social message, staged by the dramatic circle, were, for example, La Disconocida, the stranger, Natasha Mikhailovna, and Il Triunfo della Giustizia, that is to say, the triumph of justice. The party had an interest in having as many people as possible watch the plays. In light of the scarcity in places where plays could be staged, members of the theater group offered intimate performances to small groups of fans wherever possible in the popular neighborhoods themselves. To those wondering about this situation, it was explained that anyone who wants to see real theater will come to see it in a family atmosphere that unites actors and viewers. The dramatic circle continued to exist at least until 1934. Another way to spend free time was the cinema. Cinema had cost money. Here too, the Communist Party came in. The idea was spreading its message through the cinema in a price that the worker could afford. In order to realize this, the party had to cooperate with the sympathetic cinema owners. The Atikon cinema in the western part of Ignatia Street, close to the tobacco warehouses and workers' residential neighborhoods was an ideal cinema. It was run by Benito Segura and was owned by him and by Eli Atas, who was the wealthier of the two, and who also operated the Alcazar and Pantheon cinemas in the city center. Apparently, due to the proximity of the Atikon to the neighborhood of Gila Hadar, home to the militant tobacco workers, it became a magnet for party members and sympathizers. This could not have happened without the aforementioned cooperation. First, Soviet-made films were shown at a reduced price. Thus, for example, the Soviet film Casamiento de Lunazos, The Marriage of the Vampires, was publicized in El Popular in the following words. Since it was, I quote, since it was a huge success in the cinema pate, Atikon, wanting to satisfy the wishes of its many customers, succeeded in obtaining this film at a price that involved great sacrifice. No worker will be absent from appreciating one of the highest achievements of Soviet Russia. End of quote. An analysis of the wording of the ad implies cooperation between the party and the movie theater owners. Without such a cooperation, residents of Gila Hadar who wanted to watch the film had to take the tram to the city center where it was shown. Movie theater owners wouldn't have brought a film to Atikon without assurance that they would cover the costs. And the solicitation to viewers in the ad actually says that the party had bringing it to the suburban movie theater. This is the meaning of the sacrifice that the ad is talking about. The Atikon, which could hold 2,000 people, was used not only for screening films, but was also the favorite gathering place for the party and for the left in general. The Communist Party, under its Jewish section, the Bloc Popular, created in each of the popular neighborhoods a workers' club at which were held dances and balls, usually at the aim of raising money for the party targets. There, the competition was not so cruel as in the dancing balls, and at the same time, the chances of crossing the lines of one's class did not exist. The Workers' Club was also the theater of operation of the Kulturala. The Kulturala, meaning the culture, offered courses in a variety of subjects, beginning in reading and writing and ending with courses of socialist indoctrination. There, one could learn a book or read the latest issue of Avanti or El Popular. The Kulturala was also the focus of another way of recreation among the workers of Jewish Salonika, sports activities. The Communist Party was late in adopting this activity as means to recruit members to its cohorts, and did so only after it saw the success of the Zionist movement and the Maccabi organization in doing so. However, already at the end of 1926, we find Jewish workers' sports organizations in the Teneke Mahale and Gila Hadar. And at the beginning of 1927, a sports club called Progresso was inaugurated in the district of Gila Hadar. On the occasion of the inauguration of the club, representatives of sports associations, Kulturalas, of number 6, number 151, Calamaria, Altoras, Baron Hirsch, Aya Paraskevi, and Akshe Mesjid came to participate. The Progresso was intended to be headquarters of the neighborhood sports team, and the parties saw this organization as of great importance in terms of precedent and in terms of purpose. It is not certain if this umbrella organization lasted long, since the Greek language newspaper of the Greek Communist Party, Oneos Rizos, the establishment of such an umbrella framework was described in 1932. It, as the Neos Rizos wrote, it united 8 Jewish sports organizations of poor workers, I quote. However, the organization was disbanded a year later to the inefficiency and incorrect content. Incorrect content from the perspective of Rizos was a phrase referring to the ideological poverty of this organization or a lack of identification with the communist idea. A hint that the young workers simply wanted to play football. Class struggle did not interest them so much. According to the newspaper, only the Gila Hadar Neighborhood Workers Sports Organization had remained. In preparation for the elections of September 1932, a renewed effort was made to recruit the Jewish youth of the popular neighborhoods to the ranks of the party's neighborhood sports organizations, the Kulturalas. In May of that year, a conference was held at which 5 neighborhood organizations were established. According to one Kulturala activist, the success led to what he described everyone rising up against us. The expression everyone, in the expression everyone were included the Greek police and the Zionist organizations. The police raided red sports clubs and exchanged blows and brawls and exchanges of blows and brawls occurred during attacks on clubs in neighborhood number 151, Baron Hirsch, Aya Paraskevi, and Gila Hadar. The Kulturala activists did not specify who was the other side in the exchange of blows, but from the rest of the testimony, it turns out that they were teenagers who frequented the Zionist clubs that were established for them in the popular neighborhoods where football could be played. It is clear from his words that the communist effort to draw youngsters to the party through the sports club suffered a severe blow. These years were very difficult years for Salonican workers, Jews and non-Jews alike. Greece, as a country, had indeed managed to navigate the turbulent waters of the global economic crisis. However, industrial workers still suffered from great unemployment and hunger. Under such conditions, the sporting activity of the workers was a luxury. The party's sports clubs in the popular neighborhoods held up with great difficulty, if at all. Lack of funding and the inability to interest members in sports when their livelihood was in doubt led to their decay. Whereas the party saw sport as part of the class struggle, most of the workers themselves saw it as a recreation. When any kind of organization was forbidden under the Metaxas regime and the stomach was empty, sport became a luxury. Lengthy as it has been, my presentation has revealed only the surface of the subject matter. Simple and popular ways of recreation, such as bathing in the sea, Sunday field trips, or spending time with friends in a coffee house, were not mentioned at all, and we'll have to wait. In spite of this shortcoming, acknowledging the descriptive nature of my words today, one general conclusion does emerge from what have been said. Healthcare and recreation among the workers were highly politicized. The workers' access to both was brokered by the main political parties in the community, the Zionists and the Communists. If I had more time, I could show that access to decent public housing was also connected to the workers' political affinity. But let us call it a day. Thank you, my friends.